Today we're shining a light on something that doesn't get enough airtime. Dad guilt. Yep, it's real, it's quiet, it's heavy, and it deserves all the space too. When we think of parental guilt, we often picture moms, but dads carry guilt too. Sometimes it's about time or about pressure, and a lot of the time, it's about not knowing how to express it. Society still expects dads to be providers before they're present, to be strong, but not soft. But guess what? That model is broken, and it's hurting a lot of men who want to be emotionally available, but feel stuck between roles. What is one of the biggest reasons dad guilt flies under the radar? We as a society don't create spaces for dads to feel emotionally safe. There's some sort of shame around them admitting guilt because somewhere along the way, men were taught that guilt and emotions equals weakness, that emotion equals fragility, that if they're not holding it all together, then they're failing. But bottling up guilt doesn't protect anyone. It just builds resentment, burnout, and emotional distance. There are some deeply common experiences that many dads feel guilty about, such as working too much, so they're missing out on milestones for their children, games, you name it. Maybe they're missing out on the bonding stage because they don't have time off, so they have to go back to work, unlike mom, who gets to bond immediately and is breastfeeding, and they're kind of getting pushed into the background. Also, like I mentioned before, feeling inadequate with emotional support for how to help our kids either regulate or know that they have feelings too. And these are the things that we often overlook or dismiss as women, as a society, as family. But if we begin to recognize that men have these feelings ahead of time, we might be able to better support them and hopefully be able to let the men who are carrying it quietly have someone to reach out to and to lean on. One therapist said that the pressure to provide everything is a scam, and guilt often shows up when dads realize they can't do it all. And the truth is, no one can do it all. But recognizing that guilt exists for dad too, that's where support and healing begins. Up next, we're going to share a heartwarming story from one of our viewers, and this will be part 1 of the dad guilt episode because both of these men who wrote into me, I felt like their story had to be told. Get ready to hear the vulnerable, emotional side of what it means to be a dad and what he's doing to express his emotions. So without further ado, here we are. Right. So again, I'm Allie. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
We're just going to start with asking a couple questions here. So what did becoming a dad mean to you?
Becoming a father was, I don't want to say I'm one of the weird ones, if you will, but from a very young age, I always knew I wanted to be a father. Maybe it was the product of the environment I lived in, but I had always been told that I worked really well with kids, which is as a father is a huge plus. And I always knew I wanted to have a family, and I wanted, at least in the beginning when I got married, my wife is Catholic from the Northeast, so we wanted a large family, as you can imagine. But becoming a father was kind of a lifelong dream fulfilled. It marks something off the bucket list, if you will.
Okay, awesome. And I guess, did you have ever think or expect that you would feel any sort of guilt as a father?
In the normal sense of being a father, no, not really. For the things that I've dealt with, the answer is probably yes, but in the moment, I didn't think I would.
Okay. And could you tell, like, when you felt like you really started to notice any sort of guilt creeping in about being a dad? I know dad guilt is not really talked about a lot, but it's very prevalent.
Well, mine's a little different just because both of my kids were born with a whole host of physical and cognitive disabilities. And so the guilt started coming in. With my son, we knew right off the bat, we knew that he was going to have a lot of physical issues. The rare condition we didn't know until the day he was born. So that was kind of a surprise to us. But my daughter, when she was born, she was, and I hate to put it this way, but she was the normal child is what. Now, we didn't outright say that to anybody, but because she was not really showing any symptoms in the beginning, she was the normal child. Now, granted, we found out later through our pediatrician and a couple other doctors that if we were basing her development on our son, she would appear normal. But the reality was she was actually just as delayed as he was, neurologically speaking. So the guilt started coming in of, you know, we'd just been married. By the time we had our daughter, it was about 4 years to end our marriage. And what are we going to do? How are we going to provide? How am I going to teach these kids, just life and things that, traditionally a father would teach their kids versus what the mother would teach. So there was a lot of that kind of guilt in the beginning.
Okay. Um, I can imagine that that is very difficult. Was there any time that you felt maybe like, wow, was I made for this? Am I failing? Am I doing the right thing?
Yes, multiple times. When my son was born, like I said, we knew that he was going to have some physical, maybe not deformities, but like neurological delays, and he might be nonverbal, which he was, and like he was born with only one kidney, that kind of stuff. Um, there were a lot of times in those first, 2, 3, 4 years where I thought, I don't know if I'm made for this because, this is our first child. We're getting thrust into this special needs community. I have no idea what any of these issues are. It was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of almost throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. And, I didn't really start getting my footing as a father and probably till year 5 or 6, because there was a lot going on. It was a very steep uphill learning curve for both of my kids, just learning their issues and how to deal with them and what's the best quality of life and what are the secondary issues that go along with them. And so, yeah, it probably took the first 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I can imagine. And did you have anybody to help you? Did you have family to lean on, friends to lean on, anybody who could maybe even relate to you? Um,
Um, we had family in a sense. One of the common sentiments you'll hear amongst at least the special needs community is probably the most not understanding people on the face of this earth are family, and the most understanding people are strangers on the internet, is what you'll come across for the most part. Um, my parents were very helpful in the sense of, they would give us a day off one day a week and they would watch our kids when they were younger. And I mean, they knew about all their medical issues and kind of what to look out for. And if anything were to come up, we would certainly get a phone call and we'd come running. But so they would do that. And they would, when I needed someone to come to me to one of the multiple specialist doctors visits, they would come just to kind of offer support.
right, right. And how did the relationship with, or how was or is the relationship with you and your wife during that time?
Well, as the statistic goes, a newly married couple that has one special needs child, the divorce rate is like 70%.
Oh,
And
wow.
within the first 5 years, we had two kids with multiple disabilities, exactly the same within 5 years. So, I would joke with my wife and say, so does that mean our divorce rate is 100%? Because we doubled that. And I said, you can't get to 140% of divorce rate. But we kind of took on the almost the us versus the world mentality. Um, Unfortunately, with the combination of issues that my kids had, there was nobody probably in 1,000-mile radius that understood exactly what we were going through. So it was literally us against the world, if you will. I mean, we had people that could understand aspects of different things my kids were dealing with, but everything, no. So it actually brought us closer versus the stereotype with a lot of families where it just tears them apart. And there
Right.
are a lot of families I know where they got divorced over the fact that one or the other couldn't handle just the extreme issues that special needs can bring on.
Right. Right. So I guess now just tell me a little bit about how you persevered through that, what you're doing now. Obviously, I'm sure you've learned a lot going through all of this. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about you and how you did that, and if you've done anything for maybe other people who are in some similar situation like you.
Well, I'm a researcher. I'm one of those people that I want to know information. So the day that my son was born, literally, my wife had a C-section. We saw him for about 30 seconds in the delivery ER, if you will. They wrapped him up. They immediately took him to the ICU there, and then like my wife went off to recover from the epidural and just everything. And I went down to the NICU there, and it was that NICU doctor that said, well, your son is born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. And I went, he was born with what? And he kind of gave me the basics of what it was. And he goes, now tomorrow morning, the local children's hospital on the north side of Atlanta is going to send a transport team down. They're going to come get him, and they're going to transport him up to their ICU up there because they're better equipped to monitor and watch your child with just the issues that he has. And so from that point forward, I got on the internet and researched what Eagle-Barrett syndrome was. I went to the National Order of Rare Diseases, which is a government website, and found it on there. I found the National Organization for Eagle-Barrett syndrome based out of Wisconsin. And this is going to date me, but at the time I was on MySpace as a social media platform. And I actually got on MySpace and actually found a family in Washington State that actually had a child that had Eagle-Barrett syndrome, because at the time my son was born, it was 1 in 40,000 births uh, for kids that were to develop this condition. And so I got to know her, and I got a part of the national organization, and we went to the national convention. And I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm one of those people that when I'm into something, I'm 150%. I am full throttle in it, because it was one of those, I need to figure out what this is, how it's going to affect his life, and what the quality of life is going to be, at least at least for this first year. And then once I get past that, whatever's beyond that. And that's kind of how I dealt with everything. That's how I kind of moved forward, because from day one, I was always the physical care. I did all the medical procedures. I did all the lifting. I did all the, doctor's visits, hospital stays. I did all of that. And that was just kind of how I tackled that whole situation. And it even bled over into when we started finding out my daughter had issues.
Okay. Um, let's see here. So have you met other people? I know you mentioned the woman on MySpace, but over the years, have you found people closer to you?
Yes. Where I'm on the southwest side of Atlanta, I'm kind of in a suburb of Atlanta. And there's a group that deals with the south side of Atlanta, that deals with families that have all sorts of kids of all sorts of different special needs. And so that was the first group that I came across and networked with and met people and got to know different people in these communities, and, just picked everybody's brain. you know, what do I do for government assistance? What do I do for doctors for these specific areas? What do I, you know, all those different types of questions that I just didn't have answers for. So over the years, I've met a ton of people in the special needs community that I've at least networked with. Are we like this? Yes and no, but as a networking group, yeah, I've got a vast group of people that I can kind of pick their brain.
Okay. And, I'm sure you've had plenty of strong feelings. I can only imagine from one end of the emotion spectrum to the other. Um, were you ever able to speak with somebody about that? Or were you, when you met or networked with these people, was there any time where maybe you leaned on them to see if maybe they were feeling the same way you were? Or how did you deal with your emotional aspect?
Um, at least at this point in my journey, I essentially vented online most of the time. Whether people responded to or not, it didn't really matter to me. I'm one of those people that when I get something that's like that on me, however I do it, I've just got to get it off of me. It may not solve it, but at least it's out there and it's just not sitting on me. And that was a lot of what I did. And I mean, I had several people that understood, and I'm sure several people probably got tired of me always venting about things, but I mean, such is life. But um, I did a lot of venting, and I asked a lot of questions with my network, and then to be honest with you, there was at least in the beginning there was a lot of internal anger. It wasn't necessarily directed at anybody. It was more, this is the life we thought we were supposed to have, but this is the life we got. And what I didn't realize in the beginning, which is ironic now, is I didn't realize I was grieving the life lost versus the life that we got. And it took me a very long time to like get through that and realize that. And for a very long time, I went to counseling for it almost weekly, just because it was a really big issue for me.
Yeah. I think that's something that, as we get older, that is a huge thing. This anger or whatever emotion, it's there
Mhm.
constantly almost. And we don't realize at the time. But like you said, I've had instances where I'm like, oh, I actually wasn't really about that situation. It was what I thought that I should have or
Mhm.
what I thought I would be that was actually triggering that.
Mhm.
Um, and let's see. What um what would you like your children to understand about you and maybe about the type of dad that you are and or trying to be if there was one thing you could just let them know?
Well, I personally, to myself, when I found out we were having a child, kind of made a promise to myself that if I made a mistake to my kids, that I would always apologize to them. That I wasn't above saying I made a mistake. I'm sorry for doing that, because maybe in my I mean, I'm Generation X, so maybe in my generation, you run across a lot of adults that it's my way or the highway. Whether I'm right or wrong, it's still what I say, and I didn't necessarily want to be that way. And so, what I always tried to tell my kids, now understand that both of my kids had neurological delays. Both of them were nonverbal. Even my daughter, who's 16, she probably functions about 7 years old. And so, when I would make what I felt like was a mistake, I would, as simplistically as I could, would come over and go, "Hey, Daddy shouldn't have done this. Daddy's sorry. I apologize." And when I would say that, I would say, "You don't have to accept my apology at this point. If you are upset, you can be upset. I'm not going to get upset at you if you're not happy with whatever my reaction may have been, or you got in trouble for something that maybe you shouldn't have gotten in trouble for." And I still use that to this day. And now luckily over the years it's gotten 100 times better than what it initially was. But you know, I tried to teach them that I always tried to tell them that even though I'm an adult, understand that adults probably won't tell you this, but we make mistakes all the time. There's no handbook for this. A lot of times we're playing it by ear. It's trial and error. And again, to this day, I tell my daughter all the time, Daddy made a mistake. Daddy thought this was going to work and it didn't. And so I always try to tell them that, you know, we're all kind of doing the best we can with the cards that we're dealt is the biggest sentiment I wanted to try to get them to understand.
Right. And you mentioned, that especially the older generations,
Mm,
our parents' parents,
mm,
maybe, um, I feel like they did things different, right?
mhm,
So for you growing up,
mhm.
um, was there certain things that you took away from how you were raised? Maybe things that you for sure were like, oh, that's great, I'm gonna do that, or oh, that's absolutely not great, we're not gonna do that.
Um, I'm very much a proponent of my household was my parents were loving, but there were also you knew what the boundaries were. And if you crossed them, you knew what the consequences were. And that's definitely one thing I have taken into my own parenting style. Now what the consequences are may be different than maybe what my parents were. So parenting wise, my parents were your standard. They were very loving, very understanding. When we needed to get in trouble, we got into trouble. And there were, especially in high school, there were several incidences I really pushed those limits. Now, at the time, did I feel like I felt like that I was in the right and they were in the wrong? As I've gotten older, I realized, well, yeah, I was really in the wrong. And I more or less looked at my parents for what they did and how they reacted to whatever I felt like or I reacted to what if I heard that or felt like something was they felt like they made a mistake, then I was watching to see how they reacted to that mistake is the biggest thing I look for. And I mean, I've told my father several times over the years, um, my father has been recovering for 30 plus years. And I've told him, I said, I know you didn't particularly care for that point in your life, but what that taught me was you realized you had a major issue. You eventually understood it, you got help for it, and you have been better from it for 30 plus years now. And so that's more the sentiment that I took out of it, outside of the, you know, we had a problem with drinking, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it was kind of, I look more for the physical things and just because I'm a very visual learner, and that's what I picked up on.
Yeah. And I think those are the things, like, for me too, there were certain things where I was like, okay, you know, I like how they reacted to that, but maybe they didn't have to react that way.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, just kind of gauging and seeing, obviously I was raised how I was raised, and it's very hard not to raise your children how you were raised. But I think you made a great point, just kind of being like cognizant of how you're being, what you're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
owning up to it. Because, like you said, there is no handbook. This is
Yep.
hard.
Yep.
We're learning every single day, just as much as our kids are learning every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Because doesn't matter how many kids you have, they're all different.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do for one does not mean that it works for the other.
Nope.
So, let's see here. I think that was all my questions.
Okay.
Was there anything you would like to add, or any part of your story maybe I didn't ask a question that you could touch on?
Well, so I am a married father of two kids. Initially, when my wife got pregnant, Um, like I said early on in this, I'm essentially from the South, Protestant belief. My wife is from the New England states, cradle Catholic. Um, she has family members that are one of like 9 and 10. And so when we met each other and then we decided, and I proposed and we started talking about, what we wanted out of life, her first comment was, I want 4 kids. And as a guy, my first response was, well, let's have the first one and then we'll talk. Now, granted, I always kind of wanted the 3 kids, the dog, the fence, that kind of thing. So having a fourth one wasn't that much of a stretch. And when we found out she was pregnant, she called and told me, and we were ecstatic about it. And then she came home that afternoon, and we were living in a different place at the time. And she goes, one of the questions she asked me, she said, what if we happen to have a child with medical needs? And my response was, if we were meant to have a child with medical needs, then we'll have one, because I don't believe in the other alternative options one can have if they should choose not to want to have one. And I said, we'll come with it as it flows. Well, little did I know at the time when I said that, or apparently God was listening, because he certainly granted that wish for me. We had no reason to believe that we were going to have any kids with any needs. In fact, up until the week 20 appointment, all the doctor's visits were fine. All the ultrasounds were fine. We had no clue of anything coming. And in fact, leading up to that week 20 appointment, my family had gotten really big into like ancestry.com. And with my father went back like 10 generations, and there were no medical issues, nothing that wasn't self-induced, if you will, like an alcoholism or something to that effect. And so we went into the week 20 appointment. And for those that have had children, that's the one where you find out the sex of the child. So we go in there, and the ultrasound is kind of doing her thing. And, we're playfully going back and forth. And we get to the point where she's going to find out the sex of the child. And she goes, I'm at that point. Do you want to know? And so we're going back and forth. I want to know. My wife doesn't want to know. And I more or less want to know because I'm a planner. I was the one putting the nursery together. And we're playfully going back and forth. And finally, the ultrasound tech goes, well, I need to know because I found an issue. And it was at that point you could hear a pin drop in the room. And we said, we want to know the sex of the child. She told us we were having a boy, and we were thrilled to have one. And I said, can you tell me what the issue is? And she goes, well, that's more of a doctor relayed issue. And I said, okay, I understand that. And I said, well, can you tell me why you needed to know boy versus girl? And she goes, well, if it's what I think it is, it's rare in boys, but even rarer in girls. And I went, okay. So at that point, we started seeing the perinatologist, which is a high risk OBGYN. And let's see, that was week 20. So for the next 16 to 18 weeks, we saw this perinatologist, and they told us every terrible possible scenario you can think of, all of the possibilities of, medical disabilities and possible severe issues. And like they told us, your son's going to be born with one kidney, which he was. Your son's going to be born with hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. Luckily, he was not. Your son's going to be born with areas of missing white matter in his brain, which he was. And they listed like 5 or 6 more like very severe issues. And again, as I've stated earlier, we didn't know about the rare condition until the day he was born. We had no idea that was coming. Looking back, they were telling us different aspects of it. We just didn't know that it all combined to make the rare condition. And that's kind of how life in our family started. From the time he was born, he was taken up to the NICU in the local children's hospital on the north side of Atlanta. He spent 11 days there. At that point, we were assigned 6 different specialist doctors that we had to see every 6 months. At that point, we started doing surgeries every 6 months for like, I think it was 2 years almost that we had to do it. And so we finally get out of that. We finally start getting to a kind of a comfortable spot, and we start understanding what the secondary issues are for his condition. So, we do the first 2 years. We finally get through all that. We're about a year in, so we're in our third year, and we start realizing because of his rare condition, he's susceptible to respiratory related illnesses. So from that point, every 6 months, we were in the hospital in the NICU for a respiratory related illness. And every time we were in the hospital, we always went to the ICU, and we spent probably $90,000 every time we went to the hospital. And that was for the next 5 continuous years that we did that. That does not include our daughter, who has similar medical issues, but even though she had similar medical issues, she wasn't in the hospital as much. My son was the more medically fragile of the two. He spent a lot more time in the hospital. And so that was probably the first 5 or 6 years of our marriage was constant hospital stays, constant, doctor's visits, that kind of thing. And that's kind of what molded our life for years. And let's see, so when he was 7 years old or 8 years old, he had a midsection reconstruction surgery that really helped him out with his respiratory related illnesses, and it worked so well that we went from being in the hospital every 6 months to where we literally stopped going into the hospital. I mean, it worked that well, outside of the fact I was just more proactive at that time, and I was catching things a lot faster, and I had all the machinery in my house because I was trained on like 5 different respiratory related machines. And so I could catch it here faster. And then after that, we probably went he was 7. So we probably went the next 7 years with no real issues, or 8 years. And then in January 28th of 2022, he suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. What the official cause for his passing on his death certificate was sepsis and cardiac arrest due to sepsis. What I think it really was, I don't think it was that at all. I mean, I think that was a part of it. I think what happened was he got gastroenteritis. It turned into an infection, and I never caught it because it was showing signs that I wasn't used to seeing. And it got into an infection. It got into his bloodstream, and people will tell you, if you get an infection in your bloodstream, it turns into sepsis fast. And once it gets in there, it goes from like about a 40% fatality rate to like a 97% fatality rate. It's very quick. And that's ultimately what we learned after the fact of what happened. So that's kind of what the first, let's see, he was 15 when he passed. And so that was kind of what life was like, and the reason why I do what I'm doing now. When my son passed, as you can imagine, I grieved very hard. I did probably for about a year and a half. And then after the year and a half, I finally started getting to where the waves of grief weren't just battering me to the ground. It was giving me some breathing room. And at that point, I knew that I wanted to do something in my son's name that created a positive legacy for my son, outside of just his personality and who he was when he was around. So I created a grief community called Letters to Zachary. And that was birthed out of the fact that I started journaling all of my raw, open, intense, non-sugar coated feelings about just multiple aspects of just the grief journey, especially in that first year. And I started sharing those online. And when I did that, I started amassing a following. In fact, I I got a huge female following. As you can imagine, men are so wonderfully open about their emotions, and we're so great about it. So I started gaining a huge female following. In fact, one of the comments I got on one of the pieces that I posted was, how did she state it? She goes, "We've never met, we've never crossed paths. I have never, ever told anybody what my deepest, darkest feelings are about the loss of my child. I just read your letter, and you have hit the nail on the head. You have, word for word, I exactly feel this way." And, my response back to her was, "Well, I really appreciate the comments. I said it was inspired by my son. I'm glad I could write something that resonates with you. Um, but this is my, the way I'm expressing this grief is I believe that people need to see the unsugar-coated version of grief. Um, I think one of the reasons why I have the following that I do today is in today's world, people are so guarded with their words that they don't want to offend anybody, that they don't say what they truly feel. And like one of the letters in one of the like Facebook groups I'm a part of, I posted in there, and towards the top of it, I posted a disclaimer, if you will. And I said, look, I'm the type of person that I'm not going to hold back. When I'm writing these letters, they're in the moment. So if I'm in a deep emotional state writing this letter and I feel like that I needed to drop several F-bombs in this letter because that's how I felt, then that's how I'm going to write it. If that's something that offends you, I'm sorry that it does, but I am not going to stop writing the way I'm writing because it offends someone. This is how I'm dealing with it, and I feel like others will appreciate it. And so that's really kind of how the following I've gained, I grew, because so many people were just like, you so rarely hear people being 100% honest about something, especially a man being honest about emotion. And so that's kind of how Letters to Zachary started. So initially it was a Facebook page, and it has evolved into a Facebook page, an Instagram page, a TikTok page. I've got a professional website. I have a published coloring book, and I now just published a logo T-shirt. Is what and I've been doing this. I think it's 19 months at this point. I mean, it's been less than 2 years that I've done this in. Um, and I joke with people out there when I'm in like some of the podcasting groups on Facebook or talking to people, I tell people, I said, I think one of the reasons why I get people's attention is because I'm that unicorn, if you will, a man that is just willing I mean, I will say how I feel, and I don't mean to be brash about it, but if you don't like how I feel for the situation I'm dealing with, I don't really care. And
Right.
so, and this is how I'm dealing with it. And I feel like people are resonating with that. And that's kind of what I've like birthed out of the devastation that was the loss of my son, to be able to get out there and help men and women. Well, first of all, men, to give them a safe space to feel vulnerable enough to open up, to not feel like it's going to get thrown back in their face, because that does happen a lot with men. And it's one of the number one reasons why men don't open up. And then two, I do it as a way to teach women from just my personal experience of what signs you need to look for, what you can do to make things more susceptible for a man to open up, what hurdles men have to overcome just in life just to be able to open up, and just all these different aspects to help them in their personal situations to be able to deal with the mental health related to grief and to help make it a more positive experience.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have specifically a dad
Mm-hmm.
guilt episode, because um, you said something about the passing of your son, which
Uh-huh.
I'm very sorry to hear that. But you
Thank you.
said it happened because I didn't catch it in time.
Yep.
Right?
Well,
That you it's not your fault, right? And I can only imagine the emotion, the guilt, the anger, the whatever, all of the strong emotions, I'm sure, that you felt, especially that sentence, that's a
mhm,
powerful sentence.
mhm,
Um, so I really want to thank you for
mhm,
sharing because, like you said, um, women are very vocal about how they feel. There's
mhm,
no hiding that. But the dads also go through it. They also have the feelings. And
mhm,
I don't like this world where, the dad has to be the strong one because sometimes you don't. Sometimes the woman needs to step up, and sometimes we have to be the strong ones for you because we are human.
mhm.
And just because you're a male doesn't mean that you should not feel. And it should be safe for you, like you said, with no judgment. Nobody should be throwing it back at you guys.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that somebody out there like you can
Mhm.
reach multiple people.
Well, and um, I understand why you caught that statement, but I stated it that way just because, as the caregiver,
Mhm.
like I was so in tune with my son that there were several times that I knew him so well that like there was one time I got him to the hospital literally as the pneumonia was forming on the X-ray.
Oh
The
gosh.
doctor even told me that. He goes, "You could not have gotten him here any sooner than what you did. There's no way." And so that's kind of what I meant by it. But
Okay.
on the emotion side of it, like the 3 days before it, there were signs that he was showing that we thought it was a 24-hour virus. He'd gotten him several times in his life. We thought, he's just tired. All your kind of typical symptoms that come along with that. The morning of the day that he passed, I got him up that morning, and there were signs there, some of which I'd seen before, but the one that caught my attention that made me go, I'm taking him up to the hospital, something's wrong, was his midsection, which was always generally pretty pliable, was rock hard. And when I say rock hard, I mean like cinder block wall, rock hard. And what I learned after I researched after he passed was gastroenteritis can do that to the intestinal wall. And that's one of the signs. And when you start feeling that, they all say, go to the hospital, is what they say that morning. And when I tell people this, I get a lot of different reactions. But that morning, I was the one that got him up. I was the one that got him in the van. I rushed him to the hospital. I was in the ER from the moment we got in there till the moment they pronounced him. I watched the whole process. I watched him die in front of me. I mean, to this day, when people ask me, I can down to the most minute detail tell you exactly what happened, where everybody was, what was going on, what they were saying, what the doctor asked me, everything. And then you had mentioned something about like men having to be strong and like that day I had to compartmentalize because she pronounced my son not 5 minutes after, like I walked off into the other room. I had a moment for about 30 seconds. I regained my composure, and then I called his mother because her mother was working at home at the time for a major company. And the last she knew was she thought, well, I'm going to take him up there. He's going to get admitted. We're going to be our 7 to 10 days that we always are. And then I'm just saying, well, I'm in room such and such. I'm going to be up here for the next several days. Well, I had to tell her that her son was dead on the table. And I will never forget the sound she made. It is burned into my brain. And then, she regained her composure and in kind of the male fashion, I said, I'm going to say something to you. I don't mean to be overbearing, but you need to listen because I knew the state of mind she was in. And I knew that I needed to take control in that point because I knew she couldn't make decisions for herself. And so I
Mhm.
said, let your bosses know, leave work, call your parents, have them drive you up here. I'm in this room. I'll be here when you get here. And she goes, okay. And then I called my mother, who had watched our kids many times, and I'll never forget her response. Now, later after the fact, she asked me, she goes, how soon after your son, after Zachary passed, did you call me? I said, 10 minutes. And she goes, 10 minutes. She said, when you called me at 10 minutes after Zachary passed, you were eerily and stoically calm. She said it was like nothing had happened. And I said, well, I said, in that moment, I had to compartmentalize, because if I hadn't, and I was a blubbering idiot, if you will, I wouldn't have been able to relay the information that I needed to relay to you guys here, so you knew what was going on, as sad and severe as it was. And like, even when I got off the phone, the care team came into me, the head of the care team came into me, and she offered her condolences, and I didn't thank you. And I literally looked at her and I pointed at my son, who is deceased, on the table beside me. And I went, I will deal with him. And oh, no, wait, I go, this is going to sound cold and callous, and I don't mean it to be, but I said, I will deal with him in a minute. I need to know information. That's what's going to help me in this moment. And she goes, okay. And I literally rapid fired like 20 consecutive questions off to her, because there was just a lot of things I needed to know, like, what happens from here? When I go to a funeral home, who do I need to contact so I can get him home? Those type of questions. So, and then after that, I literally sat with just me and him in this ER trauma room for the next hour by myself, until his mother came up there and the grandparents came up there. And then, we were in there for about 30 or 40 minutes, and we left out and we told the ER doc. And like I tell people to this day, one of the hardest moments I've ever had was when we left. I had to grab all of his cut off clothes, put it in his empty wheelchair, and roll it through that hospital. And I said, then I had to put it in my van, and where we're located versus the hospital is we're 60 miles from the hospital. So my wife and I rode in our van dead silent for 60 miles going home. We were just stunned. We were in shock. And the room I'm in right now, you can see the letter Z. This is his room. I came into this room, and you can't see it, but on the other side of the screen, I rolled his wheelchair in. That wheelchair has not moved in 3.5 years. I came in here, I looked at his bed and saw that it was empty, and it was left the way it was when I left that morning. And it was at that moment that I literally just buckled. It finally just hit me. And, I had a very major moment in that point. I regained composure, because we had to go over to my parents' house, because like my whole family was there. And so we walk in there, and I've got 2 older brothers, and we're close in the sense of, when we get together for family like outings, we're close, we'll talk, all that. But like, do we hang out? No. And I walk into the living room there, and I see my eldest brother, and I've never ever done this around him. I saw him, and I walked into my parents' room, and I like buckled over. I don't know what it was about him. And he grabbed me and gave me a hug and that kind of thing. And I lost it for a minute. So I came back in there, and I will say that's the longest conversation I've ever had, because it was one of those where I was trying to tell them what's going on, but about every fourth word, I could feel like my voice trembling. Yeah, that right before you're just going to fall apart kind of moment. And so we had to do that. And it was that afternoon that we went to the funeral home to kind of start seeing what our options were, that kind of thing. And it was just one thing after another. And, it was the next, from the moment I got home that first time, it was probably several times a day for months that it was just like, it would hit me like a Mack truck. And it was one of those times that I was watching a Facebook reel of all things. And I don't even remember what the reel was about, but there was something in there that either reminded me something of my son or an aspect of my son. And I just start bawling, like just crying. And at that moment, I opened a Word document, and in proper like letter writing form, I wrote a letter to my son, and I verbally vomited on a page. Like it was like 2 pages of just writing what I was feeling and what was going on in the moment, and all that. And for whatever reason, I decided, you know what, I'm going to save it. So I created a folder on my computer, and I just started saving. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And then I'm glad I did, because that was the basis for what started everything I'm doing today. And the reason why I've been doing Letters to Zachary for now 19 months.
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad, that you found something and, you're making something bigger of it for, I'm sure, unfortunately, a lot of people who could benefit from it.
Sure.
Um, and I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Mhm.
Um, and again, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for today. Thank you for being here, for being human, and for letting yourself feel. Just a reminder, this podcast is all heart, not healthcare. Please talk to a professional for medical advice. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Unfiltered Feels Podcast. Share this with someone who needs it, or leave a review. And don't forget, the things you're feeling, you're not alone. I'll see you next time.